Hello and welcome back to We All Follow the Forest podcast. This time it's episode 8 and we're coming off the back of a bit of a poor result against West Ham. It was an interesting afternoon and it was a long journey down to London and it was an even longer journey back to Nottingham. After watching that, it was a bit of a tough one to watch at times, but overall, for a good section of the game, it was a good game for Forest, but it's just that last bit that I think we were let down. But I thought, let's get this weekly episode cracking, and it is a little bit later than expected, but that's on me. Some work issues. But I thought, let's get Chris from Forest All Over podcast to come and talk. So, Chris, how you doing, my friend? Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jamie. How are you doing? Yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks very much. I'm speaking about West Ham there. It's hard to understand why we concede so many late goals and why we lose or draw games from winning positions often. Obviously, I'm bleeding into last year when I talk about that, but yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah.
So you make that first big point, and I think it is the massive point because Forest have lost quite a few leads this year. United is a huge one, obviously early goals, and it was always going to be tough to hold on against any team early on. But the way that we lost it was really disappointing. And sorry, I'm going to have to do these little coughing breaks.
No, you're great.
But the way we lost that lead was disappointing. The way that we lost a lead against Luton was, of course, most notably probably the most disappointing, loss of lead in a game. And then this weekend, we went a goal down in the first 5 minutes, and I thought, this isn't good. And then after that, I think we controlled the game actually for pretty much that whole half, and a good 10 minutes into the second half, equalised before the first half, scored again with Elanga, got that lead. And I thought, I don't think we're going to hold on to the lead here. That's what I said when I was talking about the game. I don't think we're going to hold on to a lead, but I don't think we're going to lose this because I think that we're switched on enough. And I'd like to say that we've put that behind us after the Luton game, but we didn't quite do that. So what do you think is the major, or can you name maybe a couple of factors that are the reasons for Forest I don't know about losing focus or maybe losing focus, but for me, it looks like losing motivation, losing confidence, and just losing that fighting mentality.
It's hard to put your finger as a fan. You always think in your head, especially with Forest over the last sort of 20 odd years, you always think something's going to go wrong. So even when we're 2-1 up, I'm turning to my wife and I'm like, oh, that's going to go wrong though. Something's going to happen. But then at the back of my mind, I got to remember that this is a new team to any of those teams before, and this team has had relative success, so to speak, keeping itself up last year. Obviously, there's some players still in from the promotion season before, so maybe the mentality is different within the players. I don't know if it's a mentality thing or if it's just simple, basic strategy in that West Ham didn't really have that many major chances, apart from obviously the Ola Aina mistake where Souček came in and hit the bar. They didn't have any clear-cut chances other than from the set pieces or the mistake early on in the game. So that's what makes it more frustrating is we actually did quite well to execute the game plan and keep them to a minimal amount of high percentage chances. Yes, in the most basic way possible, we concede from 2 set pieces. And honestly, the game can be simply said it's won and lost in those set pieces. It was lost in 2 corners, and that's it.
So it's so easy to give away a lead, and I think we've proved that. And that it makes you worry about how many goals you have to score in a game to actually feel secure. Because we thought that 2 goals would do it at Luton, and it didn't. We thought that maybe the 1 goal difference at West Ham might be enough to edge it over, but Murillo coming off was also a big thing. So maybe, do you think Murillo's impact alone was enough to knock off that confidence and maybe lose the lead, or is that a bit of an overstatement, perhaps?
I think I don't know. I don't think it was that. I think that there was a moment with 30 minutes to go, and maybe I'm misremembering it because I was in the moment. But there was a moment with 30 minutes to go where I thought, please don't keep giving away set pieces because one's going to land. And I don't know. It just felt like Ward-Prowse was delivering just excellent set pieces in consistently, and we defended them well. And then all of a sudden we didn't. And whether it was Murillo or not, it was, I mean, to be honest, the second goal, the set piece, Murillo actually took a step forward as if to think the flight of the ball was coming to the near post, and then he readjusted and quickly went back into the 6-yard box, but it went over his head and Bowen came flying in. So it's I don't think it's specific to players going off and not being available or Murillo getting injured and our confidence dropping. We just seem to let them play their game after we went 2-1 up. And I know they scored quickly after our second goal, but it's just frustrating. It's the set pieces that drive me crazy, particularly against a team that's a dangerous set piece team, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing that always gets me, because we all know how good James Ward-Prowse is at free kicks and corners and, anything that is dead ball. James Ward-Prowse is a specialist, and I would argue probably one of, if not the best in the Premier League, right? And it was always going to be difficult. And I know people are saying tactically, well, you should have done this, but tactically, I didn't feel that Cooper was actually to blame for anything on the day. He brought on attacking options at the end to try and scupper maybe a late goal or something. So for me, when people blame Cooper, I have to say, to what extent can you blame a manager for the mentality that is on the field? Because a manager can only do so much. He can't jump on the field and play with the players. These are a group of 11 professional footballers who they will know. And of course they'll know this. I don't have to say it on a podcast for them to know that they'll be disappointed. They can do better than that. And they should have done better than that. And they lapsed concentration in probably the most stringent moments of the game, the moments that we needed it most. And people are blaming Elanga for taking his shirt off. I don't fall for that at all. I think that Elanga took his shirt off because he was happy that he's ended a bit of bad form for himself. And he was in fairly poor form. And he found himself in a position where he scored a great goal and he's looking like he's back on his best. And he made a real tough job for Kafau, down that left-hand side. He's happy. He took his shirt off. Should he have done it? I don't really care, to be honest, because it doesn't have any impact.
Yeah.
He did what he did. It was on the entire team for that. And we can't blame Elanga or Steve Cooper for that. So, I just think that, and I don't know what your thoughts on that. Maybe it's worth you telling us actually, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, with the Elanga situation, I was actually annoyed that he got a yellow card, because in my head, I'm like, Kafal's on a yellow. You have him there. I know you're an attacking player, but there's still an opportunity for you to get a late double yellow with a late challenge. We might need to buy that foul later on in the game when they're on the break, and we might need you to just go through Kafal, get a yellow card. So you can't do that anymore. You have to be more careful defensively, even though you're an attacking player. That was kind of what bothered me. The over celebration, I don't care about. The lack of focus and stuff. That's more a whole team thing. I mean, we gave away a corner immediately after that, and it was put in the middle of the 6-yard box where no defender shouldn't be able to clear that. We should be getting rid of that ball, and they scored from it. So I don't blame Elanga for that, but it's more the booking thing that bothered me. Sorry, I went off into a tangent on that point, but you know what I mean? That was the thing.
I get that. Yeah, I do get that 100%. And I suppose in the moment, I didn't really think much of it because I thought it could be a winner. You know what I mean? And I thought we'd got control on the game. Sorry. And then I think that overall we did, and I want to talk about the positive things as well, because this for me isn't a ranty podcast. It isn't a positivity only podcast. It's a podcast that talks about what actually happened. And I don't want to be too strict about things, and I don't want to dig into anyone, because I don't really think that anyone had a particularly awful game. I think that overall they played really well. So let's talk positives, because I thought that in possession we looked strong. And I want to give kudos to the midfield three, more Mangala and Sangare, because I felt that Dominguez didn't have a great game, but some saying that he was ill earlier in the week. So maybe that's had an impact on him. I don't know. But Sangare and Mangala for me look really good. And in particular, I want to hone in on Sangare because he's a player that his price tag has kind of maybe diminished his credibility a little bit with some Forest fans who just think he's £30 million player. Why hasn't he come to the Premier League and adapted straight away? How dare he not do that? Where in reality, that for me against West Ham was his best game in a Forest shirt. And he did good against Villa, but at West Ham, he stepped up, he looked confident, he wanted the ball more often, and it looked like Cooper's given him more responsibility. So what was your overall thoughts on his performance that game?
I think Sangare was brilliant. I think he had definitely his best game with us so far. The Villa game he was very good in as well. I think it's good. He's sort of growing into his position. I think it was similar to our big signing last year. Gibbs White took a little bit of time to get going. last season and eventually grew into that player that really took on responsibility in the attacking midfield area of the pitch. But Sangare was brilliant. I think that the one key point that we can all make is I think it was him that won that ball back and then laid the lovely through ball for Gibbs White. So he won the ball back in the middle of midfield and immediately set up a goal scoring opportunity, which turned into a goal. That's one massive thing. He won most of his duels. He was very aware. He was a bit sharper than he usually is as well. I mean, the last 2 games, he sort of picked that up. He's been a bit sharper around the pitch. I thought he was brilliant. I'll be honest. I thought he was absolutely brilliant. I thought Mangala was brilliant as well. You mentioned him, but Mangala's been brilliant all season. He's been consistently good every single game he's played. So it's kind of an expectation now in a weird way. But Dominguez that you mentioned there, yeah, I didn't think he had a great game, to be honest. He never really got going. And as a result, it was difficult for the midfield to sort of get going. But luckily, Sangare and Mangala were on top form. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that word expectation, because it's something that I was just actually thinking about when you were saying it, and I had a little think about benchmarks and the benchmarks that players have set for themselves. And so there's a lot of talk about Morgan Gibbs-White, particularly this week, because he hasn't been in great form and he has been out of position. But to an extent also, despite him being out of position, I think fans do expect more. And he will probably expect more of himself because he'll know that he's not in the hottest form that he can be. We know that he's not in the best form he can be because we've seen the best of him. And I always attribute a player's lack in form, not because they don't have the quality, but because of confidence. We saw it with Brennan. He came back. We saw it with Taiwo. He got his confidence and became a star. We're kind of starting to see it with Sangare now. He's gaining his confidence, which, by the way, his former coaches have said is a big problem of his confidence. If he hasn't got confidence or he feels that knock, you can tell it impacts him quite a lot because he's quite a quiet individual. And you can tell he's getting his confidence. And for Gibbs-White, that confidence is there. But expectation is massive because players in this Forest squad have had such an upturn or have had such an incredible turnaround that fans now expect so much. And for Mangala, for what, if you had given us one of his performances recently, probably against Aston Villa most importantly, and you put it into last season, let's say, just put it into a game last season, you'd be saying, oh my goodness, that was phenomenal. What a start. He's everywhere. But because he does it on such a regular basis, people don't really talk about it that much, which is in a way brilliant. But he's kind of not getting the recognition I still feel he deserves, because I was saying it for a while. I think he's a player and a half. And this season, he's really defined that. So what are your thoughts on expectation overall? Do you think that sometimes maybe it's the kind of Morgan Gibbs-White we saw last season? I don't know how to word this, but the expectation that he created has in a way impacted him negatively this year, because in a way he's not been played in the same position, and now people are expecting the same but from a different place. If you get what I'm trying to say.
100% get what you're saying. I think with Gibbs-White last year, the expectations were really high early on, but we gave him a bit more time and we were patient. I think specifically to hone in on his game, Gibbs-White's an attacking player. So every time he gets the ball, like you said, he's expected to make things happen. Last season, there's going to be moments where he didn't make things happen and he gave the wrong ball, or the ball was a bit ahead of Brennan, or et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't put the right set piece in. But almost like 60, 70% of the time, he would create something or play the right pass that would almost create something. And the other 35% maybe he didn't. And we could live with that. We went, well, he's in attacking position. Obviously, it's not going to always work out. Just like a striker's not going to score every single goal that they shoot on goal, right? So this season, I think the difference is it's almost like 40% of his efforts are working out, and the 60, a good chunk of them aren't. And I think to get his confidence back, he needs to sort of just play the simple ball again and play about 5 or 6 simple balls before he can get going again. But he's in that position where he's expected to create things. And I think that's what frustrates people, because they saw so much potential from him last season and how most of the time he would create, that this season they're like, why isn't he doing what he used to do last season? I mean, he still had a couple of assists, but it's just not as many. It's not as regular. And he doesn't have Brennan as an outlet. As for Mangala, I think last season he was unlucky with injuries. And we were trying to find our feet as a team. We were such a melting pot of different players. At one point, O'Brien was starting at the beginning of the season. He's not even playing for us anymore. So it's just, there was so many midfielders in and out that it was hard for him to find his feet. Now his game is regular, so therefore his style of play is more regular, and he's been brilliant from day one, in my opinion, this season. And it was more noticeable in the early games because there were a lot more players who were not playing well, but Mangala was always playing well. But now that there's a lot of players playing well, we just sort of let him fade into the background. It'll be similar with Sangare as well. We're surprised by him now, but in a few games he'll still be playing well, but we'll be focusing on the attackers or the defenders, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And during, I think Mangala as well, that first time he stepped onto the pitch, I think it was Everton away last season. I remember watching him. Him and Lewis O'Brien actually looked like a pairing. And I knew that he was going to be quality straight away. That first turn he did, and just to get around his man, he's just so good on the ball, and his positioning's perfect for me. So I love Mangala. I think he's obviously a very humble guy. He loves interacting with the fans. So it's hard not to like him on and off the pitch. But I want to talk about, you mentioned a former Huddersfield man, Lewis O'Brien, who's also now a Forest player at Middlesbrough on loan. But I think he's got an injury. I think he'd just come back from surgery not long ago. Well, let's talk about the guy that was essentially just collateral in the deal at one point, Harry Toffolo, the man that people said is just a championship fullback. He's got no future in this league. And when Renan Loddy said he couldn't come back to Forest or didn't want to come back to Forest, Harry Toffolo wasn't even a suggestion to replace him. We were looking at who else have we got? Who else have we got? Put him to the back. But Harry Toffolo has proven, and this is a two-ended question. There's going to be two questions in this. Is number one, is Harry Toffolo underrated? And I think I know the answer, in my opinion, massively. And number two, and this is maybe a little bit of a Morgan Gibbs-White related question, and it's something that's been brought up a lot, is do you think that Harry Toffolo should maybe be given a chance at taking set pieces for Forest?
So the first part of your question is, yeah, Harry Toffolo is underrated. We did have actually quite good games last season off the bench. There was a couple of games. I know he was laid off the bench against City when we drew with them at home, but there was moments I remember thinking, oh, he's quite solid. He knows the mission. He does the game plan and executes it quite well. Sometimes Forest fans, we love this with these flashy left and right wing backs to show up, but Harry Toffolo just does the job. I think this season he's been brilliant. Anytime he's been asked to do anything, particularly with some controversy off the field, which we won't go into, I think he's been really good. He's held his head high and got on with the job. And then he's obviously had a few assists along the way. So I do think he's been really good. I did think of him as like a third or fourth option at the start of the season. Even I thought maybe even Williams going over to the left at times, but he's been really, really good. As far as set pieces go, you know, it's very easy to get dragged into sort of a knee-jerk reaction about set pieces, particularly when you've seen a game where your team's lost 2 set pieces and your set pieces haven't been converted. I do think Morgan Gibbs-White hasn't been at his best with set pieces this season, but I also think that there was a good point made on another podcast recently where someone said, well, you know what, maybe we give someone a chance to take them on one side and we keep Gibbs-White on the other side. And that might be the best option. You get the in-swingers or the out-swingers, whichever way you want to play it, from a right footer and a left footer like Toffolo taking the other ones. Also, we don't know that Toffolo is necessarily going to be starting every game. So Gibbs-White's a set piece taker because he's nailed on every time as well. So it's not every game Toffolo starts. He has been recently, but we don't necessarily know. The answer, I suppose, is yes, I would let Toffolo take them on one side and Gibbs-White on the other. And I would even see if there's anyone else who can take set pieces in the team and just create a bit of competition for set pieces as well, because lots of teams do it. They have lots of different people taking different set pieces all the time, except for West Ham, of course, who have James Ward-Prowse.
Yeah, it's just him. He's just him. But I think we did it with Renan Loddy. He took some corners. He took some free kicks. I mean, I think it was ruled offside actually, but he had an absolutely superb free kick. He was having an awful game. He was a stinker of a game against Man United away. I can't remember if it was in the cup or league. And he threaded a fantastic free kick round. And I think it got called for offside. But I like Renan Loddy on free kicks, and Morgan Gibbs-White also took some. And I think that idea would work well with Toffolo, particularly higher up the pitch. I do think Toffolo has something to offer because with 3 or 4 assists so far this season, there's a reason that people are asking about it. There's a reason because sometimes things happen so often that they aren't just merely coincidental. And that could be said for his assists. That could be said for his form. Harry Toffolo is a solid Premier League fullback who, if he wasn't at Forest, would still be in the Premier League, in my opinion, because as you say, he doesn't have a fancy name. he hasn't played for fancy clubs and he has had a tough time recently. But believe me, he does absolutely everything that you'd want him to do, everything and more that you'd expect him to do. And he has had the best few games of his life against some absolutely, terrifyingly good opponents at times. More so with Aston Villa. And he's stepped up when Forest needed him to most. And he reminds me of Jack Colback in some ways because he just stepped up out of the abyss, came out of pretty much nowhere when no one expected it, off the back of a failed loan to Anderlecht. And then all of a sudden, Forest first team every week. And people are saying, you've got to have him in that team now. You've got to have him in. Players like Serge Aurier, who last year you wouldn't even question being in the first team, being pushed out by Ola Reina, Toffolo on the left, Nuno Tavares, who's on loan, on the bench. So it's clear to me that Harry Toffolo's been working really hard. And when Nico came off the bench against Villa, he looked good as well. So it's nice to know that there is that competition. But one thing I do want to talk about in that West Ham game was maybe the kind of defensive turn off on set pieces. I mean, I know we've spoken a lot about set pieces. What do you think Forest can do better to defend against set pieces? Because you're not always going to face James Ward-Prowse every week, but you've got to be better prepared.
I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard question to answer when the week before you play Villa, concede as many, if not more, corners to them, another good set piece team, and yet defend them so well. Like that's the annoying thing is, we play Villa at home, we win 2-0, we keep their chances to a minimum, but they have a load of corners, and we defend them brilliantly, and then a week later we do the complete opposite. So it's hard for me to really pin down exactly what there is. All you can do is drill set pieces and defensive set pieces. But I've said this on the podcast I do. I just think reduce the corners if you're playing a good set piece team. And I know that sounds simple because sometimes if we give space out wide, a player will lob it off and it'll ricochet off Mangala's chest and go out for a corner. There's nothing you can do about that. But I think maybe change your game plan to build it more around not conceding as many set pieces. Obviously, free kick set pieces, that's an obvious one. But I mean, in terms of corners, we're conceding an awful amount of corners. And I mentioned this again, Luton, Everton, Fulham, all these teams who played Villa and West Ham the last few weeks, they conceded 2 to 4 corners against them because they know they're good set piece teams. Whereas we conceded 10 against Villa and I think 9 against West Ham. But I just think it's a simple answer,
Yeah, it's a simple answer. It's the solution that I suppose is, as you say, probably the less simple part about
exactly.
it. And that's always the tough part because you kind of say, well, what tactic do you impose? And I'm not an FA trained coach or anything that can probably suggest anything. And Steve Cooper and his coaching team are far more qualified to comment it than me. But we can see where weaknesses are present, definitely. Which is
just to contradict myself, sorry to interrupt you, just to contradict myself so people don't think I'm an idiot. Look, I do understand that our game plan was to push the team out wide so that we don't have Bowen coming through the middle or Watkins in the Villa game. So we had to concede corners. I get that. And I suppose that's the trade-off is you allow a different strategy, defensive strategy by minimizing their wide play in corners. I understand, but in a game against West Ham, it's like James Ward-Prowse is brilliant from corners. Why are we not? Is that not one thing we should be focusing on rather than trying to defend them? Is trying to reduce them? But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, but there's caveats, I suppose, with every tactical decision that's made. But it was in the end, I think that the set pieces did us, and it was painful watching it because you kind of just looked at the corner and you went, "Oh, he's going to do it, isn't he? He's going to do it." And the guy next to me that I was commentating with said, "Well, Forest, West Ham's equalised. That's surely the end of the game now." And I'm like, "Please, why did you just say that? Because it's never the end of the game when you say that. Keep your mouth shut." Yes, I'm superstitious. I'm massively superstitious, and he killed that superstition by saying that. We had words after it, and that will not be repeated. I've already said to him, please, if you're commentating with me, you cannot be saying things like this. You've just got to let the game play out because otherwise my nerves just become too much. But no, on a serious one, though, the through ball, as you mentioned way earlier in the podcast from Sangare to Gibbs-White was really nice to see. Taiwo, again, in the right positions. He had a really good game. I actually really weirdly, I want to talk about the substitutions because it's not something that really anyone has talked about that much. But I thought off the bench, despite the loss, Origi looked like he really wanted to get involved, like he was desperate to get involved. And the shot, unfortunately, was pretty much straight at the keeper, which was a shame. It was a lot of power, but maybe just not the right placement. And but Chris Wood, I thought, actually, coming off the bench, he looked like a bit of a handful, weirdly enough.
Yeah, and I think he's done well this season, so he's confident in his ability. He was getting in and amongst it, in and around them. He does a lot of running, whether he's quicker than Taiwo or not, that remains to be seen. He's obviously not, but he was good. He was throwing himself around. But I kind of, now it's like we go back to the beginning of the podcast, so it's expectation. Now all of a sudden, Wood scored 3 goals this season, and he's had a reasonably good season off the bench. I'm starting to think, oh no, that's a good substitution. He'll throw himself around. So I didn't really, I suppose, think about it. I just thought, yeah, Wood will throw himself about and he'll do well. That's a decent sub to make. The Origi sub was interesting to me because I knew he'd create at least one chance for himself, always does. And it was actually a good effort, like you said. It was the keeper saved it well, but it was a good effort in the end. But yeah, I thought Wood was good, and he's our perfect substitute striker to throw in the mix at the end of a game when we're trying to, grab something.
Yeah, and I do think that Forest maybe demand a different profile of striker. To be honest, someone that's maybe in a way matches a Awoniyi, or you want someone who's as good as a Awoniyi, if not better. And I don't think we're going to get that in January. Maybe in the summer you can get that, and the Premier League demands that you have strikers like that ready all the time, and it will set us apart for sure. But I think Origi and Chris Wood are doing good for now, and Chris Wood's contract's up in the summer. Origi goes back in the summer, so all you're going to be left with is Taiwo. So I think that the summer of 2024 will be when Forest go out and get a landmark striker again to kind of compete and kind of back up to Taiwo, which is what you really need. But more importantly, I think that, in my opinion, and we'll talk about the international break now just briefly, but overall, I would say the West Ham game, while frustrating and mistakes were definitely made, and it was the individual errors that cost us big time, I think, and it has been a consistent issue for a while. I think that actually we had quite a good game, and we looked good in possession. We were constantly trying to open up little holes of space in the West Ham midfield, in the defence. They didn't press us as much as we thought, and we took advantage of that on many occasions. And actually, I thought we did really well in many instances. So there is positives to take away from that game. But of course, the negative is you don't come away with any points. And that's the frustrating part. But Brighton at home next. We've got a good record against them last season. Can it carry on? So I'm going to ask you this question, probably one of the last questions of the podcast is, there's so many international breaks, and I don't want to go off too much of a tangent about them because I think there's way too many. And I think it's causing injuries. There needs to be more rest for footballers for their own health and their own, well-being. But another international break. Do you think that this is going to kill Forest momentum? The momentum, I suppose, that they had in terms of mostly good performances the last 3 games, or do you think that this is going to maybe help Forest and they're going to come back strong?
Well, firstly, I'm not into the international breaks at all right now because I'm a Republic of Ireland fan and it's been a nightmare for me. All right. So yeah, I'm happy just to forget them. Yeah, exactly. But I think honestly, the answer to that question is I think it's a good thing for us. I don't think we're necessarily a settled team yet. We've gone from cruising against Luton and drawing late to losing away to Liverpool 3-0 to beating Villa at home to then losing in a West Ham game where we're sort of going, how did we not get any points from that game? We did play well. Our performance was good. Like you said, I agree. But I think we're not a settled team yet. And we're starting to find our 11, but I still don't think we're a settled team or squad. And I think the break can only do us good. It can only do us good. And then we come back to back-to-back home games. Because I think we've played 2 more away games than home games. So we come back to back-to-back home games. And it gives us a chance to really sit down, reassess, see who has to do well in training. And also, do we have a couple of injuries coming back? I know Origi and Wood were back for the last game, but is there anyone else we're missing? I think Hudson-Odoi, he won't be back necessarily, but he's on his way. Montiel, yeah, I think it gives us a chance to get our full squad back. Some of the injuries, Hudson-Odoi is probably back in training. I don't know if he is. I think he is. but it just gives us that opportunity, and it gives Cooper an opportunity to try more things. And yeah, I even though a lot of players are away in the international break, it'll just give us a bit of respite. So yeah, I think it's positive, definitely.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to everyone coming back now. Hopefully, safe, touch wood. And I'm hoping that Felipe can come back at some point as well. It'd be nice to see him back. I know that he's like training pretty minimally throughout the week. Really, he's not training a lot because of his knee. He didn't really train much last year because of, again, the knee issues. So if we do get anything out of Felipe this season, I would imagine that it will probably be, and as Cooper said in his interview, probably him making a lot of sacrifices to be able to play. And honestly, I can't see him staying next season, which is what a lot of people expected. But I can't imagine that he'll play, football much after next summer, which is an unfortunate thing to say because he's the best defender I've seen at Forest in my lifetime, certainly. So, but
Murillo might be eventually, but we'll see.
Murillo might be eventually, but I
yeah.
still feel that Felipe is on just a completely different level, and he plays with such an elegance that you wouldn't have thought from a man who entered football at 20 or 21, and he used to sell mushrooms over in Brazil, and he got picked up, and
I didn't know that.
yeah,
That's
he
cool.
did. I can't remember what team he played for. It might have been Corinthians, or there was a team in Brazil. He got picked
I
up.
didn't know he started that late. He started at 2021.
I'm sure it was about 20 or 21. Wow. I mean, if I'm not correct, then check me.
No, it's
whatever,
interesting.
fact check me.
Yeah.
But for anyone that's listening, if you know the actual story, but I'm pretty sure it's about 20. And then he played for Porto. Of course, Bolly played for Porto as well for a bit. Then he joined Atletico and then obviously came to us, which was a nice story. But people were saying, oh, he's 33. He's got nothing in him. And really, he was a massive part of us staying up. So that's a bit of a little bit of a love letter to Felipe if you're listening, in a way. But that was our podcast talking about the West Ham versus Nottingham Forest game. An unfortunate loss, things we can improve on, lots of positives, hoping that the international break won't kill momentum and we'll come back stronger. But just before we go, Chris, tell us a little bit about your podcast. Plug away, my friend.
Oh yeah, well, the podcast is Forest All Over Podcast. It's just basically myself and Matt, my close friend. We seem to argue quite a lot on it, but it's basically the theme is Forest All Over the World. So we get a lot of different Forest All Over the World's fans writing in, and we sometimes get them on. We've had people from in China, Hawaii, Bahamas, etc., all over the world who are part of fan groups in different parts of the world: Toronto, New York, and it's sort of that's the theme. But it's also kind of like two best friends who hate each other but love Forest and just argue all the time. So yeah, check it out. It's called Forest All Over Podcast, and it's at NFFC All Over on Twitter or at Forest All Over on Instagram as well.
Give it a follow, people. Get listening. New episode out at the moment as well. Give it a listen. It's a good one. So make sure you tune in. Forest All Over Podcast. And if you've enjoyed this podcast as well, please feel free to subscribe and like, and let us know your thoughts on what we've said, because as always, we want to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to join as a guest, we're getting a different Forest fan on every single week. So make sure you tune in. Let us know if you'd like to join the chat. I'd love to talk to you. So thank you for joining. That was episode 7 of We All Follow the Forest.
Thanks, Jake.
Episode 8 of We All Follow the Forest podcast. Thank you, Chris, for coming on, my friend. Great to speak to you.
It. We'll get you on the podcast again as well. We'll get you on again. We've had Jamie on one of our episodes and he's brilliant. And actually, funnily enough, I went to the Chelsea game in the new year. I've been to a couple since, and I bumped into Jamie as I was walking up the steps with my then fiance, now wife, and he was really nice. So do like and subscribe to this as well, because he's a legend.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, that was a wicked night, actually. I remember that moment. It was so like, I couldn't believe it had happened. After all the talks, we actually met each other just by chance. So
by coincidence.
The world brings people together. And I suppose this is bringing you together with us. And the Forest All Over podcast is bringing people together throughout the world that support Forest. So if you enjoy this, subscribe to or follow Chris's podcast. And we'll be making more episodes in the coming weeks. So follow us, and we're looking forward to talking more. So, but before we go,